My family tried to have me committed to a mental institution when I discovered their human trafficking ring, and when I escaped and exposed them all, they begged me to keep quiet. But it was too late in my family. We were always the perfect wealthy household on the outside, but I never understood why we had so much money or why my parents were so secretive about their work. Didn't matter if I asked about Daddy's business, or why we moved houses every 2 years, or why strange men came to our house at all hours of the night. I grew up thinking this was normal until I turned 22, because that's when my father decided it was time I learned what really paid for my expensive lifestyle. I had always been the perfect daughter, straight A's in private school, full scholarship to university, never questioned why we paid for everything in cash, never asked why Mom burned documents in the backyard every Sunday, never wondered why we had security cameras everywhere, and why Daddy always said he worked in import-export when people asked what he did for a living. Honestly, I thought I was so lucky to have parents who could afford to give me everything I wanted, until the day my father called me into his home office and told me it was time I joined the family business. I was so excited, honestly. I had been waiting my entire life for this moment. I thought, finally I'm going to be trusted with the family secrets. Finally I'm going to understand why we live so differently than everyone else. Finally I'm going to be treated like an adult instead of a child who needed to be protected from the truth. But when my father started showing me ledgers filled with numbers that made no sense, profits that seemed impossible for any legitimate business, I started getting confused. That's when he told me we sell dreams to desperate people, and I had no idea what that meant. Until he explained that our family ran the largest human trafficking operation on the entire East Coast, I literally couldn't breathe as he started explaining their business model like he was describing a normal company, how they recruited young girls from poor countries with promises of legitimate work in America, how they transported them here using fake documentation, how they housed them in what he called facilities, but were really converted warehouses where they kept these girls locked up, how they connected them with wealthy clients who paid premium prices for their services. My father used these corporate sanitized words like we were discussing a tech startup or consulting firm, not literal modern slavery. And when my mother walked into the office during this conversation and saw the look of absolute horror on my face instead of showing any concern for my obvious distress, she calmly sat down and started explaining how this business had funded my entire existence. "Everything you've ever owned," she said, in this matter-of-fact tone like she was reading from a script, "came from these girls, your private school tuition, your college expenses, your designer clothes, your fancy car, your spring break trips to Europe. All of it was paid for by trafficking victims, and now it's time you gave back to the family that provided you with such a privileged life." That's when they told me what my role would be in their operation. I would be the legitimate face of the business with my business degree. I would run the front companies. They used to launder all their money with my clean criminal record. I would handle all the legal paperwork that required someone without a background with my innocent appearance and educated way of speaking. I would be the one dealing with law enforcement if any questions ever arose about their activities. They had literally been grooming me my entire life to be their perfect cover, and I never even knew it. But when I asked them what happened to the girls after the clients were finished using them, or when they got sick or tried to escape or became problems, my father's expression got really dark, and he told me that wasn't my concern. My only job was maintaining the books and keeping the operation profitable. But I kept pushing the issue because I needed to know what happened to girls who became liabilities. That's when my mother completely lost her temper and told me the truth. They killed them. Not directly, she explained. Like she was discussing a routine business expense. They had what she called partners who handled disposal when girls became too much trouble, when they got pregnant and couldn't work, when they tried to contact their families back home, when they threatened to go to police when they got too old or became damaged goods that clients no longer wanted to pay for. She pulled out a different ledger from my father's desk, one that tracked girls who had been what they called retired over the past 5 years. And there were literally hundreds of names with dates of arrival, dates of retirement, and coded notes about different disposal methods. I realized I was looking at a death list of innocent young women who had trusted my family's promises of a better life. I ran to the bathroom and threw up everything in my stomach when I came back to his office. My parents were waiting for me with a legal contract spread across the desk. They wanted me to sign documents that would make me an official partner in all their legitimate front businesses. And once I signed my name, I would be legally implicated in everything financially tied to their entire operation and trapped forever. Just like those girls, except my prison would be legal and financial chains instead of physical ones. I told them I needed some time to think about such a big decision, That was honestly the biggest mistake I could have made over the next 3 days. I did nothing but research everything I could find about human trafficking, missing persons reports, FBI investigations into similar operations, news articles about girls who had disappeared from the exact same countries my parents recruited from. I started finding photos and stories of young women who matched the names and descriptions in those ledgers. I had seen families desperately searching for daughters who had been recruited by operations that sounded exactly like my family's business. I realized I was literally living in a house that was built on the graves of innocent girls. I found testimonies from survivors who had escaped from trafficking rings, describing conditions that matched exactly what my father had shown me in those facility photos. I read court transcripts from cases where traffickers used the same recruitment methods, the same transportation networks, the same client systems that my parents had described to me in detail that day. By the fourth day, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to sign their contract. I wasn't going to become part of their operation. I was going to turn them in to the authorities and hopefully save whatever girls were still trapped in their facilities. I contacted the FBI's human trafficking hotline and arranged to meet with a special agent the following week to give them everything I had learned. But my parents must have been monitoring my internet activity and phone calls, because that night everything changed in the most terrifying way possible. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my bedroom door being literally kicked off its hinges. 3 enormous men I had never seen before grabbed me from my bed, zip-tied my hands behind my back, and dragged me downstairs in my pajamas while I was screaming and trying to fight them off. My parents were standing in our living room, with multiple suitcases already packed like they had been preparing for this exact moment. "We know exactly what you've been planning," my father said in this cold, emotionless voice I had never heard him use before. "Did you really think we were stupid enough to give you access to our operation without monitoring everything you did online? Did you really think we wouldn't find out about your little FBI meeting? Did you honestly believe we would trust you with information that could destroy us, without having a backup plan ready?" They had been watching every single thing I did on my computer the entire time. They knew about my research. They knew about my phone calls to the trafficking hotline. They knew about my scheduled meeting with the federal agent. They had been 3 steps ahead of me from the moment I walked out of that office, and now they had a solution that would eliminate me as a threat, while keeping themselves completely protected from any consequences. My mother pulled out this thick stack of official-looking medical documents that I had never seen before, records showing a long, detailed history of severe mental illness, that I had never actually had psychological evaluations claiming I suffered from paranoid delusions and violent tendencies towards family members, doctor statements recommending immediate psychiatric intervention and long-term institutionalization. All of the paperwork was backdated, going back several years, and all of it was completely falsified. But every single document had the signatures of real licensed medical professionals who were obviously being paid by my family. "You're going to have a complete psychotic breakdown tonight," she explained to me like she was reading from a carefully prepared script. "You'll be found by concerned neighbors in a completely incoherent state, making wild, impossible accusations about your loving, supportive family. You'll be hospitalized immediately for your own safety and for the protection of others. And sadly, you'll never recover enough mentally to be released back into society." The plan was absolutely perfect in every way, and I realized they had probably used this exact same strategy on other people before. Who would ever believe the crazy mentally ill girl claiming her respectable wealthy parents ran a massive human trafficking ring? Who would investigate a prominent family that was clearly just grieving their sick daughter? Who would question licensed medical professionals who were obviously just trying to help a dangerous and disturbed young woman get the psychiatric treatment she desperately needed? They were going to lock me away in a mental institution forever and destroy any evidence I had gathered while painting themselves as the tragic victims of their daughter's severe mental illness, and there would be absolutely nothing I could do to stop them. But they made one crucial mistake that would end up completely destroying their entire criminal empire. When I first contacted the FBI earlier that week, I hadn't just called the trafficking hotline like most people would. I had also sent extremely detailed emails to the specific agent I was supposed to meet, including photographs of every single ledger my father had shown me, addresses and descriptions of every facility location I could remember, and copies of every document I had managed to secretly photograph when my parents weren't watching me. But more importantly, I had uploaded absolutely everything to multiple secure cloud storage accounts and sent the access information to 3 different major news outlets, 2 international human rights organizations, and a lawyer who specialized in trafficking cases with very specific instructions to publish everything immediately. If I didn't check in with a predetermined coded message within exactly 7 days, I never told my parents about any of these backup plans. As those three men loaded me into an unmarked van with tinted windows, presumably heading to whatever psychiatric facility my parents had already bribed into accepting me without any proper legal paperwork or court orders, but exactly 23 minutes into the drive, we were suddenly surrounded by what felt like dozens of FBI vehicles with their lights flashing and sirens blaring. Turns out the agent I had contacted wasn't just some random federal employee taking trafficking reports. He had actually been building a comprehensive case against my family's entire operation for almost 3 years. And my detailed information was the final missing piece he needed to get warrants for immediate arrests and coordinated raids on all their facilities. The FBI had been monitoring my family's phone calls, internet activity, and financial transactions since my very first contact, which is exactly how they knew about the kidnapping attempt, and were able to intercept us before we reached whatever institution my parents had planned to hide me in. As federal agents arrested my parents right there on the side of the highway, my mother started screaming hysterically that I was severely mentally ill, that I was dangerous to myself and others, that I needed immediate medical attention and psychiatric care. She kept waving those falsified medical documents around and insisting that everything I had told the FBI was just paranoid delusions from a sick mind that needed professional help, not criminal investigation. But it was already way too late for their lies to work anymore, because the FBI had spent the entire night conducting coordinated raids on every single facility I had identified in my reports. They had already rescued 47 girls from 4 different locations across 3 states. They had already arrested 12 wealthy clients and 19 other people who worked as partners in various aspects of the operation. They had seized computers, phones, financial records, client lists, and enough physical evidence to prosecute everyone involved at every level. The evidence was so overwhelming and comprehensive that my parents' desperate last-minute attempts to paint me as mentally unstable only made them look more guilty and showed investigators the extreme lengths they were willing to go to protect their criminal enterprise from exposure. The trials took 22 months, during which time I lived in federal protective custody, because my family and their associates had made very specific credible threats to have me killed if I testified against them in court. But I testified anyway, appearing in courtroom after courtroom, day after day, for weeks, describing in excruciating detail everything my parents had shown me, everything they had planned for me, and everything I had discovered about the scope of their operation, watching my parents sit in those defendant chairs, listening to survivor after survivor testify about the horrific things that had been done to them. Seeing all the evidence presented piece by piece in front of a jury was both incredibly satisfying and absolutely heartbreaking. I kept thinking about how close I had come to being silenced forever, and how many more girls wouldn't have been saved if their plan to institutionalize me had actually worked. My father was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. My mother received 52 years in federal prison. 17 other people associated with their operation also received significant prison sentences ranging from 15 to 35 years, and the judge called it one of the largest and most sophisticated trafficking networks ever uncovered and prosecuted in United States history. Every single asset associated with their criminal business was seized by the federal government, including our massive family home, all of our expensive cars, and every bank account they could trace back to the operation. I was left with absolutely nothing except the clothes I was wearing when the FBI rescued me from that van. But honestly, I didn't care, because for the first time in my entire life, I was truly free. I spent the next year and a half working 3 different part-time jobs while finishing my final year of college. I lived in this tiny studio apartment above a pizza restaurant that smelled like pepperoni all the time, ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for most of my meals, and rode the city bus everywhere because I couldn't afford to buy a car. It was honestly the hardest year of my life financially, but it was also the most authentic and honest year I had ever experienced. After graduation, I got a job with a nonprofit organization that specifically helped human trafficking survivors reintegrate into society. I used my business degree and my unfortunately intimate knowledge of how trafficking operations actually work to help law enforcement agencies identify and shut down similar networks. I helped write new federal legislation designed to better protect victims and more effectively prosecute traffickers. I spoke at conferences and training seminars, teaching people how to recognize the signs. Within 2 years, I had become the youngest program director in my organization's 50-year history. Within 4 years, I was regularly testifying before congressional committees about anti-trafficking legislation and policy reforms. Within 6 years, I had started my own nonprofit organization that had directly helped rescue over 300 victims and contributed to shutting down dozens of trafficking operations across multiple states, and even internationally, I had built an entire career and life purpose based on helping the exact same people my family had spent years hurting and exploiting. But last month, I received a letter that was forwarded through my lawyer from my mother in federal prison. She said she was deeply sorry for everything that had happened to me. She said she finally understood why I had turned them in, and that she was actually proud of the important work I was doing now to help other victims. But then, at the very end of the letter, she asked if I would please consider visiting her one last time before she died. Apparently, she's developed stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the prison medical staff say she probably has less than 4 months left to live. My father's lawyer also contacted me recently saying that my father desperately wanted to see me one final time before my mother passes away, so they could both ask for my forgiveness and try to make some kind of peace with me before it's too late. They want reconciliation. They want me to remember all the good times we had as a family before I learned the truth about how they actually made their money. They want me to understand that despite everything they did, they really did love me in their own way, and that everything they did was because they wanted to provide the best possible life for their daughter. They want me to visit them in prison and give them some kind of forgiveness and closure before they die alone, but every single time I even think about visiting them, I remember those ledgers with hundreds and hundreds of names. I remember the photos of terrified young girls locked in warehouse dormitories. I remember my parents casually discussing murder and disposal like they were talking about taking out the weekly trash. I remember them trying to have me declared legally insane and institutionalized for life rather than face any consequences for their actions. Some people ask me if I'll ever visit them before they die, if I'll ever be able to find it in my heart to forgive them, if I'll ever acknowledge that they loved me in their own twisted way, despite everything they put me through and despite all the innocent people they hurt. The answer is no, and it will always be no. Because real love doesn't traffic innocent human beings for profit. Real love doesn't build wealth and luxury on the suffering and death of children. Real love doesn't plan to lock your own daughter in a mental institution forever just to protect your criminal secrets. What my parents felt for me wasn't love. It was ownership, pure and simple. They saw me as just another valuable asset in their criminal enterprise, someone who was only worth keeping around, as long as I served their purposes and helped them avoid consequences when I stopped being useful to them, when I became a threat to their operation. They tried to dispose of me exactly the same way they disposed of all those girls. The only difference between me and those victims is that I had resources and privileges that they didn't have. I had education and connections and legal protections that my wealth and social status had afforded me. Those girls had absolutely nothing except whatever hope and support my organization can provide after we managed to find them. So instead of visiting my dying mother in her prison cell, I spend my time visiting the survivors we've rescued and helped rebuild their lives, instead of forgiving my parents for their crimes. I work every single day to ensure that people exactly like them face full consequences for their actions, instead of remembering happy family moments that were all built on lies and blood money. I focus on helping create new families by reuniting the girls we save with the families back home who never stopped looking for them. My parents gave me biological life, but they also tried to completely destroy that life when I threatened their business. The survivors I work with remind me every single day what real family actually looks like. People who protect each other and support each other and sacrifice for each other without expecting anything in return. People who would never hurt innocent people to make themselves wealthy. I built my own chosen family from all the people who believed me when I told them what seemed like an impossible truth from the FBI agents, who literally risked their careers to save my life, from the nonprofit workers who taught me how to channel my trauma into meaningful purpose, from the survivors who trusted me enough to share their stories and let me help them heal. That's the family worth protecting, that's the legacy worth building, and that's exactly why I'll never look back at the people who gave me life, but tried to destroy my soul.